They refused Ozzy Osbourne entry to a luxury restaurant, then discovered who he was. Paris breathed differently that night. The rain had stopped just an hour before sunset, leaving behind a city slick with reflections, golden lights shivering across puddles like liquid stars. Somewhere down the Rue Saint-Honoré, a street saxophone cried into the wind, carrying a melody so mournful it almost sounded like confession. Ozzy Osbourne walked alone beneath his umbrella, boots brushing against the wet cobblestones. He wasn't in a rush. He rarely was these days. The world had already sped past him for decades. Screaming crowds, backstage chaos, hotels that all smelled the same. Tonight, he wanted only quiet. He had flown into Paris earlier that morning for his upcoming concert at Bercy Arena. 2 days from now, the lights would burn bright again, tens of thousands of people chanting his name. But for now, he sought something smaller, something human, something that didn't require a stage, a dinner maybe, just one meal where he wasn't Ozzy Osbourne, the Prince of Darkness. Just a man who still believed that life could taste good. The chauffeur had recommended a place, L'Étoile Royal, a 3-Michelin-star restaurant tucked behind the old opera house. Ozzy hadn't been to a place like that in years. Why not? He had muttered to himself in the mirror while tying back his long black hair. Even devils deserve a bit of heaven once in a while. Now, standing outside the glass doors of the famous restaurant, Ozzy hesitated. Inside, men in pressed suits spoke softly over crystal glasses. Women's laughter chimed like silver bells. A golden glow spilled through the glass. It looked perfect, perhaps too perfect. He saw his reflection in the window, a man in black, silver rings glittering on tattooed fingers, a long coat that whispered of rock shows and rainstorms. He smirked faintly. Yeah, I don't exactly scream fine dining, do I? Still, he stepped forward. The doorman opened the door with a curt motion, and the sound of soft piano spilled into the street like perfume. The restaurant was a cathedral of refinement. Velvet walls, chandeliers like inverted galaxies, every fork and wine glass aligned as if by compass. The air smelled faintly of truffle and champagne. At the reception stood a man with posture so straight it could cut glass. Pierre, the maître d'hôtel. He was tall, elegant, with hair slicked so precisely it gleamed under the light. He looked at Ozzy with a faintly polite smile, the kind reserved for people who might belong but probably didn't. Bonsoir, monsieur, Pierre said smoothly. Do you have a reservation? Ozzy returned his smile, his voice soft, low, touched by that unmistakable Birmingham accent. Yes, mate. Under the name Gabriel. Pierre typed something into his computer. His eyes flickered, then his tone shifted almost imperceptibly. Ah, yes, Mr. Gabriel, however. He hesitated, scanning Ozzy from head to toe, from his black coat to the skull ring on his index finger. I'm afraid we have a dress code. Jacket and tie are required. Ozzy blinked, half amused. Right. Didn't know I'd need armor for dinner. I'm sorry, monsieur, Pierre continued with cool detachment. Perhaps there are more casual establishments nearby that would suit your style better. At a nearby counter, a young waitress froze mid-step. Her name tag read Marie. She knew that voice instantly. She'd grown up with her father playing Paranoid in Changes every Sunday morning. Her father called Ozzy the poet of the broken. Now the poet stood right there and was being dismissed like a street busker. Pierre, she whispered. That's Ozzy Osbourne. Pierre gave her a sharp look, the kind that silenced new staff instantly. That's irrelevant, Marie. We maintain standards. Everyone is treated equally. Ozzy's lips curved slightly, not in anger, but in a sad sort of understanding. He'd lived this scene 1,000 times, in 1,000 cities. Still, he tried. Look, mate, I've got a reservation, I'm hungry, and I promise I'll behave. The only thing I'll bite is my dinner. Pierre didn't smile. I'm afraid not, monsieur. Ozzy nodded slowly, his eyes dimming but not hardening. It's all right. I'll find somewhere else. He turned toward the door, but before he could take another step, a calm, resonant voice interrupted. What's the problem here? The crowd parted slightly as Chef Antoine Bouvier emerged from the kitchen. To his staff, he was legend, an artist in white known for discipline, brilliance, and the rare ability to make people cry over soup. To him, every plate was a poem. Every mistake, an insult to art itself. Pierre straightened instantly. Chef, there's no problem. Just enforcing our policy. Antoine's sharp eyes studied the man in black. Recognition dawned, followed by disbelief. Monsieur Osborne. Ozzy offered a small, almost boyish shrug. That's what my passport says. Antoine's face softened, then tightened again, not from arrogance, but shame. He looked at Pierre, then back at Ozzy. Monsieur, please forgive us. There's been a misunderstanding. No worries, chef, Ozzy said gently. Happens all the time. I just wanted a quiet meal. Guess I should have brought me crown and cape. A soft laugh rippled through the nearby tables. Antoine stepped forward quickly. Please, allow me to fix this. You honor my restaurant with your presence. We have a table ready for you. Ozzy hesitated. His whole life, people had swung from scorn to flattery in seconds. He could have walked away, and no one would have blamed him. But he saw something sincere in the chef's eyes. Not guilt, but the hunger to make something right. All right, Ozzy said finally, his voice warm. On one condition. She serves me. He nodded toward Marie, who stood frozen, eyes wide with disbelief. She seems to be the only one here who knows who I am. Antoine smiled. Of course. They led Ozzy to the restaurant's best table, a round corner seat by the window overlooking Paris, the Eiffel Tower glowing in the distance like a golden memory. As he sat down, conversations whispered around him. Recognition spread like slow fire. Phones appeared discreetly under tables. Marie approached nervously, her hands trembling as she offered him the menu. Mr. Osborne, she began softly, it's an honor. My father. He always said your music kept him alive during the rough years. Ozzy smiled kindly, eyes crinkling behind his glasses. Tell him I said thanks for listening. Without people like him, I'd still be working the slaughterhouse. She laughed, blinking away sudden tears. Would you like to order, sir? I'll let your chef decide, Ozzy said. If he's half as passionate as he looks, I trust him. She nodded and disappeared into the kitchen. Pierre stood frozen as Antoine turned toward him, his expression unreadable. Do you realize, Antoine said quietly, who you just turned away? Pierre swallowed. Chef, I was following protocol. No, Pierre, Antoine interrupted. You were following prejudice. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. Shame carried its own volume. Antoine turned back to his staff. Tonight, he said, we cook for a man who defined rebellion, endurance, and truth in his art. Cook with your hearts. As the kitchen ignited into motion, Pierre stood silently by the wall, the weight of realization pressing heavier than any reprimand. At Ozzy's table, things began to change. The businessman from 2 tables away, a tall man with silver hair, rose quietly and approached. Mr. Osborne, he said in fluent English. Forgive me, I don't mean to disturb you. My name is Philippe Moreau. When I was 16, I nearly ended my life. My parents divorced, I felt lost. But one night I heard your song Changes. I don't know why, but it made me feel seen. It kept me here. Ozzy stared at him for a long moment, his eyes reflecting both pain and tenderness. That means the world, mate. That's why I still do it. Music keeps us alive, doesn't it? Philippe smiled through glassy eyes. It does, Mr. Osborne, it truly does. He slipped a business card onto the table. If you ever need anything while you're here, please call me. It would be an honor. Ozzy tucked the card into his coat pocket. You've already done enough, lad. As Philippe walked away, Ozzy looked out the window again. Paris shimmered, the Eiffel Tower blinking like a heartbeat. For the first time that day, he felt at peace. Antoine personally emerged from the kitchen carrying the first dish, a delicate reinterpretation of English pea and ham soup, served cold with a wisp of truffle foam. This, Antoine said reverently, is a tribute to Birmingham. Industrial roots, humble beginnings, transformed through art. Ozzy grinned. You know, that's the nicest thing anyone's ever said about peas. Laughter erupted around the room. The tension had vanished. Even Pierre from afar smiled faintly. As the night unfolded, each course became a conversation between chef and musician, between art forms, between 2 men who understood what it meant to create beauty from chaos, and in every glance, in every note of laughter, the restaurant was learning something money could never buy. Pierre Laroche had worked at L'Étoile Royale for nearly 20 years. To him, perfection wasn't a pursuit, it was a religion. He believed in the choreography of fine dining, the way napkins folded like origami birds, the silent glide of waiters, the timing between the clearing of plates. He'd built his entire identity around control. And control left no room for unpredictability. That's why, when the man in black had stepped through the doors that evening, the long coat, the heavy boots, the silver crosses clinking faintly like restless ghosts, Pierre's first instinct hadn't been curiosity. It had been defense. He had seen too many tourists wander in, mistaking L'Hotel Royal for a bar or a curiosity. Too many selfies under chandeliers. Too many broken etiquettes that chipped at the image he spent years maintaining. So when Ozzy Osbourne said the name Gabriel, Pierre's mind had already decided, this man doesn't belong here. But now, standing at the reception while the restaurant buzzed softly around him, Pierre's certainty began to crumble. He could see them from where he stood. Ozzy at the corner table, the faint shimmer of candlelight reflecting in his glasses, speaking softly to the waitress, Marie, the way he smiled, the gentle way he nodded as she spoke. There was no arrogance, no anger, no trace of insult. Just calm. Pierre felt something cold tighten in his chest. He remembered his words. Perhaps there's somewhere more suitable for you. The phrase replayed in his head, echoing now like a slap. He had used that tone before, on others years ago. Always politely, always professionally. But now, for the first time, he saw it from the outside. He had not been guarding standards. He had been guarding walls. The waitress who remembered the music Marie Dupont was 24, the daughter of a mechanic and a piano teacher. Her father, Jacques, had played in a small band back in the 80s. Nothing famous, just smoky cafes and cheap beer. But every time he came home from a gig, his eyes shone like he'd been touched by starlight. When Marie was a child, she'd wake up to the sound of his old record player. Black Sabbath, Blizzard of Oz, Diary of a Madman. The needle crackled, and her father would hum along, grease still on his hands, smiling as if music made life tolerable. Listen to his voice, Marie, he'd say. He sounds like Pain learned how to sing. Those mornings made her fall in love with art, not the kind hung on gallery walls, but the kind that came from broken people who refused to stay broken. That's why when she saw Ozzy Osbourne walk in earlier, her heart had leapt. And when she saw Pierre turn him away, she had felt something break inside her. Now, as she served him, she wanted to make it right. Not because he was famous, but because her father had been right. Some people carried music inside them, even when they weren't playing. The murmur of recognition by the time the second course arrived, the restaurant had changed its rhythm. Where once there had been rigid elegance, there was now warmth. Conversation turned to whispers of admiration. Is that really Ozzy Osbourne? He's much gentler than I imagined. I can't believe Pierre almost refused him. Ozzy noticed the stares but ignored them. He wasn't here to be a spectacle. He was here to feel human again. As Marie placed his next dish, seared duck breast glazed with honeyed port wine, he thanked her quietly. Marie, right? You've got steady hands, he said kindly. Her face flushed pink. I'm trying, sir. I'm a bit nervous, he chuckled softly. Why? I'm just a bloke with bad hair and too many rings, she laughed. You're a legend, Mr. Osborne. Ozzy's smile faded slightly, replaced by something gentler. Legends are just people who didn't give up when everyone told them to quit. Don't let the word scare you. Marie felt her throat tighten. My father will never believe this. He always said your music helped him survive the factory days. Ozzy leaned back, his eyes softening. Then we've both worked in places where dreams go to die. Tell him I said thanks for still believing in the noise. Pierre's confession. Pierre couldn't concentrate. Every time he tried to focus on the other guests, his eyes drifted back to that table. He saw Antoine walk out of the kitchen again, carrying a dish with reverence, explaining it personally. The chef, who usually reserved conversation for critics and royalty, was now laughing softly with a man Pierre had dismissed at the door. Pierre's stomach twisted. He thought about his own beginnings. His first job at a tiny inn outside Lyon, where his father worked as a janitor. He had scrubbed dishes until his fingers cracked. He had promised himself that one day people would respect him, that he'd be someone whose word carried authority, and somehow that dream had hardened into pride. Somewhere along the way, he'd forgotten humility. He approached Antoine quietly near the kitchen door. Chef, he murmured, voice trembling, I owe you an apology. And him, I don't know what came over me. Antoine didn't look angry anymore. He simply nodded. Then make it right, Pierre. Tonight is your chance. Pierre hesitated. He wouldn't want to hear from me. Antoine looked at him evenly. Perhaps, but you won't sleep until you try. In the eyes of the artist back at the table, Ozzy stirred his drink slowly, watching the rain return outside the window. He had always loved rain. It made the world quieter, made people softer. When he was a boy, rain was the only thing that drowned out the sound of his parents fighting. When he was older, it was the rhythm that taught him how to find music in chaos. He looked around at the restaurant, the chandeliers, the laughter, the luxury, and smiled faintly. He had seen the same thing in stadiums, just dressed differently. People needing to belong, people craving validation. He'd learned long ago that the stage and the dining hall weren't so different, both filled with people trying to hide their fragility behind performance. Marie noticed his distant look. "Are you thinking about something, sir?" Ozzy nodded. "About how strange it is. People spend their whole lives trying to be perfect. But perfection's boring, love. It's the cracks that make something beautiful." Marie smiled softly. "Like your music." He grinned. "Exactly. Half of it was mistakes I just refused to fix." The doorman's returned Pierre stood near the kitchen doors, palms sweating, rehearsing words like a schoolboy preparing for confession. He waited until Antoine gave a subtle nod, then gathered his courage and walked toward the corner table. The conversations around him hushed instinctively. Everyone knew. Everyone was watching. Ozzy looked up as Pierre stopped beside him. "Mr. Osborne," Pierre began, his voice low, trembling. "I owe you an apology. I treated you in a way no guest should ever be treated. I judged you by your appearance, not your humanity, and I'm deeply sorry." Ozzy studied him for a long, silent moment. Behind the dark glasses, his eyes were unreadable, but not cold. Then he stood slowly, placing a hand on Pierre's shoulder. "You know," Ozzy said softly, "I've been judged my whole life. Teachers, managers, journalists, even my own reflection sometimes. And you know what I've learned?" Pierre swallowed. "What's that?" "That it's never too late to learn better." Pierre blinked, tears threatening. "You forgive me?" Ozzy smiled faintly. "Of course I do, mate. You just gave yourself the hardest lesson you'll ever need." He extended his hand. Pierre shook it, head bowed. The restaurant erupted into quiet applause, not for the spectacle, but for the humility of the moment. Even Antoine, watching from afar, felt a lump rise in his throat. The taste of Grace dinner continued, but it was no longer just a meal. It had become communion. Every laugh, every shared glance, every story that followed was filled with something sacred, unspoken gratitude, connection, humanity. Marie watched as Pierre poured Ozzy's wine himself. Carefully, reverently, almost as penance. Ozzy lifted his glass slightly. "2 second chances," he said. Pierre nodded. "And to learning how to see." As they drank outside, the rain softened into mist. Paris shimmered like a dream half remembered. Inside, no one saw fame anymore. No one saw rank or wealth. They only saw a man, flawed, kind, unforgettable, reminding them that dignity doesn't wear a tuxedo. The hum of the restaurant had shifted. What had once been a shrine to formality now breathed like a living soul. The laughter that once felt rehearsed had become genuine. The distance between tables had disappeared into shared warmth. Somewhere between the sound of wine being poured and cutlery clinking against porcelain, L'Étau Royal had transformed, not because of who entered its doors, but because of how they all began to see each other. Ozzy Osbourne leaned back slightly in his chair, watching the reflections of chandelier crystals flicker across the wine glass in his hand. He wasn't used to quiet admiration. In arenas, applause was deafening, electric. But this gentle awe, this reverent silence, was different. It wasn't about fame. It was about respect earned in humility. Chef Antoine Bouvier stepped out from the kitchen once more, carrying a plate like it was a sacred offering. His crisp white uniform caught the light, and even the waiters seemed to hold their breath as he approached. "A feast of stories." "Mr. Osborne," Antoine said, voice low but steady. "This next course is something special." He set the plate before Ozzy, a creation so intricate it looked sculpted rather than cooked. A slice of roasted lamb glazed in blackberry reduction, resting atop a swirl of truffled potatoes shaped like a treble clef. Sprigs of rosemary crowned the edge of the plate like emerald notes. "I call it Requiem for the Common Man," Antoine explained. "It's inspired by my father, a butcher. He worked 12 hours a day so I could cook. I think you might understand that." Ozzy stared at the dish, the aroma tugging at some deep memory. His father had been a toolmaker at the factory in Birmingham. His hands always smelled of oil and metal. "He worked until his back broke," Ozzy murmured. "Never complained once," said "Real men build, not boast." Antoine smiled faintly. Then this dish is for him as well. Ozzy picked up the fork gently, almost reverently. The first bite melted on his tongue, sweet, smoky, alive. He exhaled. "Chef," he said softly, "you've turned love into flavor." The room laughed quietly, but there was truth in his words. Antoine bowed his head slightly, emotion flickering through his eyes. "For years I thought perfection was control," Antoine said. "But tonight I'm learning it's honesty." Ozzy raised his glass. "Amen to that." Marie's memory, at the edge of the room. Marie watched the exchange with tears she couldn't quite explain. This wasn't just a dinner anymore. It was a symphony of redemption. When she had first taken the job at L'Atau Royal, she thought of it as survival, a temporary step between dreams she couldn't afford. Her mother had passed 2 years ago. Her father's hands trembled too much to play guitar anymore. Music had left her house and silence had replaced it. But tonight, watching Ozzy smile, watching Pierre serve him, watching Antoine speak like a poet, something returned. It wasn't just sound, it was meaning. She remembered her father once telling her, "The world will always make you feel too small for your dreams. But remember, the biggest stars are made from dust." And now, sitting across from her, was the proof. The musician and the chef Antoine lingered at Ozzy's table as the next course arrived. A delicate dish of smoked sea bass with lemon foam, surrounded by edible petals that shimmered faintly under the chandelier light. "Do you know, Mr. Osborne," Antoine said, "music and cooking are not so different. Both demand rhythm, timing, and soul. One uses silence, the other, hunger." Ozzy smiled, turning his fork thoughtfully. "And both are ruined by too much ego." Antoine laughed softly. "True. I used to believe success meant applause. 3 stars, critics, celebrities. But lately, I wonder if real success is something quieter." Ozzy nodded. "When I was young, I thought being loud made me alive. Then I realized being kind does." Antoine's eyes glistened. "I will remember that." For a long moment, they sat in silence, 2 artists separated by craft but united by purpose. The world outside continued, the rain, the cars, the lights, but inside L'Atau Royal, time had slowed to reverence. Pierre's redemption. Pierre watched from a distance. Each laughed between Ozzy and Antoine, another chord striking at his conscience. He had apologized earlier, yes, but apology, he realized, was only the first note in the long song of redemption. So, quietly he stepped back into service, clearing tables, refilling glasses, ensuring comfort with the same precision he'd always had, but this time, with heart. When he passed Ozzy's table, Ozzy caught his eye and smiled, a small, knowing nod that said, "We're good," and something inside Pierre loosened, like a door unbolted after years of silence. He realized then that his mistake had given him something rare, humility. He thought about all the faces he had dismissed before, all the people he had looked past because their suits weren't tailored or their accents weren't refined. How many stories had he missed? How many miracles had he turned away? He made a quiet vow to himself. Never again. The song of the crowd as dessert approached. The air in the restaurant had become something else entirely. Guests who had come for formality now found themselves swept into a collective emotion they couldn't name. The businessman, Philippe, returned briefly to thank Ozzy once more. A woman showed him a photo of her son holding a guitar, eyes bright with dreams. An elderly couple whispered that their first date had been at a Black Sabbath concert in 1973. Each story struck Ozzy's heart like a quiet drumbeat. He listened, truly listened, not as a star, but as a man. This, he thought, is what music was always about, not fame, not noise, connection. When Antoine brought out the dessert, a dark chocolate souffle dusted with gold leaf, he said softly, "This final dish I call Resurrection." Ozzy raised a brow. "Now that's a title I can relate to," Antoine smiled. "I thought you might. Chocolate and bitterness, sweetness and burn, opposites that create harmony." Ozzy broke the surface of the souffle, steam curling upward like incense. He took a bite, closed his eyes, and laughed softly. "You're not a chef, mate. You're a bloody composer." The restaurant erupted in warm laughter and applause. For a brief second, everyone forgot where they were. Michelin stars, prestige, reputation, none of it mattered. They were just people. sharing light. A lesson served warm when the laughter died down. Ozzy placed his fork gently on the plate and looked up at Antoine. Then Pierre, then Marie, he said slowly. When I walked in tonight, I felt like that kid again, the one who didn't belong anywhere. The one everyone thought was trouble. Funny thing is, after all these years, I still get reminded how easy it is for people to judge what they don't understand. The room grew quiet. He looked at Pierre. But what I learned a long time ago is this: kindness has louder echoes than cruelty. You never know whose life you're saving by showing a bit of grace. Antoine's throat tightened. You've reminded us all of that tonight, Ozzy smiled gently. Then maybe that's the real encore. The unscripted ovation as Antoine and the staff began to clear the final plates. Someone at the back began to clap softly. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, the restaurant rose in unison. Not out of celebrity worship, but pure human gratitude. The applause rolled through L'Hotel Royal like thunder muffled by velvet walls. Pierre's eyes filled. Marie wiped her cheeks. Antoine bowed his head, hand over heart. Ozzy stood slowly, humbled, almost shy. Blimey, he muttered. You lot are gonna make me cry. The applause swelled again. Even the chandelier seemed to tremble in the sound. A night redefined later as the guests began to leave. The restaurant lingered in the afterglow of something extraordinary. Antoine watched as Ozzy stood by the door, shaking hands with staff, thanking them one by one. When it was Marie's turn, she extended her hand shyly. Thank you, Mr. Osborne. You've no idea what tonight meant to me. He squeezed her hand warmly. Oh, I think I do, love. You reminded me that fame means nothing without humanity. Then he turned to Antoine. Chef, tonight wasn't about food. It was about soul. You served more than a meal. You served perspective. Antoine's voice trembled. And you, sir, reminded me why I cook. They shook hands. Two creators, two survivors, two men who had turned pain into art. As Ozzy stepped outside into the Paris night, the drizzle returned, misting his glasses. He tilted his head back, letting it cool his face. He smiled to himself. The lights of L'Hotel Royal glowed behind him. Not just a restaurant anymore, but a testament to grace, humility, and the magic that happens when we truly see one another. The rain outside L'Hotel Royal had softened to a delicate whisper. Inside, the restaurant lights dimmed one by one like stars bowing to the moon. The night was nearly over, but the story unfolding within its walls was not. Most of the guests had already left, murmuring goodbyes and clutching memories they couldn't quite explain. The room smelled of roses and roasted almonds, the faint hum of jazz playing from the ceiling speakers. The storm had passed, but something profound lingered, an invisible presence, like music that refused to fade. Ozzy Osbourne sat alone at his table, tracing the rim of his glass with a silver-ringed finger. He had been quiet for several minutes now, watching the reflection of the chandelier sway gently in his half-finished wine. Marie stood near the bar, pretending to clean glasses. But she was really just watching him, the way one might watch a living song. Antoine approached slowly, a white towel still draped over his shoulder, his chef's coat faintly stained from the night's intensity. He stopped at Ozzy's side. Would you like some tea before you go, Mr. Osborne? Ozzy looked up and smiled softly. Tea sounds nice. Never trusted myself with more wine. That's how I used to ruin good nights. Antoine chuckled quietly. Earl Grey? Perfect, Ozzy said, leaning back. And maybe one more piece of that soufflé. Life short. Antoine's realization. Antoine sat down across from him, something he rarely did with guests. The restaurant was almost empty now, just the two of them and Marie, who moved silently between tables. I must admit, Antoine said, his voice quieter than before. I've cooked for presidents, for royalty, even for musicians before. But tonight felt different. Ozzy raised an eyebrow. How so? Antoine took a breath. Because tonight wasn't about service. It was about redemption, about learning that perfection means nothing without compassion. Ozzy smiled. You sound like a songwriter now. Antoine laughed softly. Maybe I am, just with knives and butter instead of guitars. They both sat in a comfortable silence for a while. The sound of rain pattering against the windows filled the room. Antoine finally said, Do you ever get tired of being misjudged, Mr. Osborne? Ozzy's eyes drifted to the window. Used to, not anymore. People see what they're ready to see. If they need to call me a devil to sleep better at night, let 'em. I know who I am. Antoine studied him. And who is that? Ozzy smiled faintly. A man who did a lot of stupid things and somehow lived long enough to learn from them. The two men laughed quietly. The kind of laughter that comes after survival. Pierre's reckoning in the kitchen. Pierre stood alone at the sink, his reflection faint in the window overlooking the wet street. He had finished cleaning hours ago, but he couldn't bring himself to leave. His hands rested on the counter, still trembling slightly. Not from exhaustion, but from shame. For 20 years, he had built his life on presentation, the illusion of control, the choreography of luxury. And tonight that illusion had cracked like thin glass. He remembered Ozzy's hand on his shoulder earlier, the warmth in that simple gesture. Most people, when insulted, retaliated with pride, but Ozzy had met arrogance with kindness, and that somehow was more devastating than anger could ever be. Pierre sat down on a stool near the counter, pressing his palms together as if in prayer. He thought about his father, a mailman who'd worn the same gray coat every winter, who once said, "Son, you don't have to shine brighter than others to be good. Just don't forget to be warm." Pierre had forgotten. He had replaced warmth with polish, humanity with protocol. And now a man who'd been called the Prince of Darkness had taught him what light truly meant. He whispered into the empty kitchen, "Merci, Monsieur Osborne, for seeing me." The quiet conversation Marie brought Ozzy his tea. "Thank you, love," he said, gently stirring the spoon. "You've been brilliant tonight," Marie blushed. "It's been the best night of my life," Ozzy chuckled. "You'll have better ones. You're young. You've still got a few storms to survive." She hesitated, then asked, "Mr. Osborne, can I ask you something personal?" "Go on, then. Why are you always so kind? I mean, people say fame makes most people proud, but you seem softer." Ozzy thought for a long moment, eyes on the swirling tea. "Because I've met monsters, love. Not the kind people talk about in songs, real ones. The kind that wear smiles and forget hearts. I spent years being one myself. Anger, pride, addiction, they make you think you're invincible. But then one day, you wake up and realize being strong isn't about scaring people. It's about forgiving them." Marie's eyes glistened. "You forgive even when they hurt you?" Ozzy nodded. "Especially then. Because if you don't, their darkness stays in you." Antoine watched in silence, realizing that the man before him wasn't just a musician. He was a survivor who had turned pain into grace. The monologue Ozzy set down his cup and leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to that soft, gravelly tone that could fill a room without needing volume. "When I was a kid, I couldn't read well. Teachers thought I was stupid. Other kids laughed. When I started singing, people said my voice was too rough, too strange. When I made it big, they said I was too wild. And when I grew old, they said I was too broken." He smiled faintly. "Funny, isn't it? I've spent my whole life being too something." Marie and Antoine listened, motionless. "But here's what I learned," Ozzy continued. "Every too much they threw at me was just another way of saying I didn't fit their box. And you know what? That box was too small anyway. The world needs people who don't fit. That's where the real art comes from. The real compassion, too." He paused, eyes distant. "Tonight I saw a man judge me by my coat and another feed me his heart through food. I saw a girl remember her father because of a song. That's beautiful, isn't it? That's what keeps me believing in people." For a long moment, no one spoke. The rain continued to hum softly, the clock ticking above the door the only other sound. Then Marie whispered, "You've given us more than music tonight, Mr. Osborne." He smiled. "And you've given me hope that the world still listens." Antoine's gift Antoine rose quietly, went into the kitchen, and returned with a small, handwritten card. "I wrote something while you were speaking," he said. Sliding it across the table, Ozzy looked down. It was a menu card, but instead of dishes, it had words. "New dish, La Ozzy. Inspired by the man who reminded us that light often hides in black. Flavors of smoke and honey. Strength, sweetness, rebellion, grace. Served without judgment." Ozzy read it twice, then looked up, eyes glistening. "That's beautiful, chef." Antoine smiled softly. "It'll stay on the menu, so that we never forget tonight." Ozzy laughed quietly, shaking his head. "Blimey, you're gonna make me cry again." The song without sound it was past midnight when Ozzy finally stood. Marie helped him with his coat, her hands trembling slightly. Pierre had reappeared, waiting quietly by the door, his eyes lowered in respect. Ozzy stopped beside him. "You did good tonight, mate." Pierre swallowed hard. "Thank you, sir. I don't deserve your kindness." Ozzy smiled. "No one ever does. That's why it's powerful." He stepped outside into the misty air, his breath forming faint ghosts in the cold. Behind him, the restaurant door closed gently, but the warmth remained, spilling light onto the cobblestones. He stood there a moment, staring at the quiet Paris street, the puddles reflecting the dim glow of street lamps, the faraway hum of a saxophone drifting through the rain, and softly, almost to himself, Ozzy said, "Funny how the nights that start cold end up warming the soul." Epilogue of the night back inside. Antoine gathered his staff one last time before closing. "Tonight," he said softly, "wasn't about a celebrity or a concert. It was about learning that greatness isn't loud. It walks in quietly, wearing black, asking only for a seat." The staff listened, eyes glistening. Marie smiled through tears. Pierre bowed his head, whispering a silent prayer of thanks. Outside, the rain began again, gentle, forgiving, endless. Morning laid a pale ribbon of light across the Seine, and Paris breathed as if it had slept through a good dream. The rain had washed the city. The cobblestones gleamed, and somewhere a baker slid trays of buttered moons into an oven. The world resumed its rituals. Ozzy Osbourne woke before the alarm, the room still and soft with the hush that follows honest tears. He sat up on the edge of the bed and watched the city through the hotel window, Paris in its uncostumed hour, ordinary and beautiful. For a long while he let the silence speak back to him. It said, "You did right to stay, to forgive, to listen." His phone buzzed across the bedside table. At first it looked like the usual flood, messages from managers, promoters, the tour team. But as he swiped, a different current surfaced and pulled him under. "Last night I saw a man judged for his coat and revealed by his kindness." The post was from Philippe Moreau, the silver-haired businessman from the restaurant. He'd written a simple account. No gossip, no performative outrage, just a clear, humble witnessing of what happened at L'Étoile Royal. A grainy photo from across the room showed Ozzy half smiling, head tipped toward a young waitress who looked like hope in an apron. It had been shared tens of thousands of times while the city slept. Replies threaded beneath it like candles placed along a river. "My dad took me to my first concert, Black Sabbath 1974. I was terrified of crowds. I learned courage that night. I was turned away once because I looked poor. Reading this healed something I didn't know was sore. Grace changes rooms faster than fame ever could." Ozzy exhaled, the smallest shake of laughter in his breath. "Kindness had hands of its own. You offered it once and found it working night shift, rearranging the furniture of 1,000 hearts you'd never meet." He texted 3 words to Philippe. "Thank you, brother." Then he tapped Sharon's name. She picked up on the second ring, voice bright and awake in a way only love can make you. "How's my bat?" "Still flapping," he said. "Paris is kind this morning." She listened as he told the story, how the door had stuck and then swung wide, how a chef had cooked with his heart, and a doorman had learned to see. He didn't dramatize it. He didn't need to. Sharon asked 2 questions, both soft knives. "Did you feel small?" "And did you feel loved?" "Yes," he said to both. "Then heaven came to dinner," she murmured. "I'm proud of you." He could see her smile without seeing it. "Get some rest, you old romantic," she added. "And wear a jacket," he laughed. "Aye, ma'am." At L'Étoile Royal, the morning smelled of polish and citrus. Antoine stood at the pass long before the first delivery. He had written La Ozzy on the draft of the new menu in a hand steadier than his heart. Below the name he penned a short line: smoke, honey, iron, grace. He knew critics might roll their eyes. Let them. Every menu hit a ghost. He was done pretending his kitchen wasn't a chapel. He gathered the staff. No lecture today. No critique of last night's service. Just a single sentence that let daylight in. "From this day," Antoine said, "we will serve excellence with humility, or we will not serve at all." Heads lifted. Even the youngest dishwasher stood straighter. Behind them, Pierre waited by the door in his charcoal suit and a tie he had tied twice to get right. He held a jacket draped over one arm, not for a guest but for himself. The note in the breast pocket was short, folded neatly. He walked alone to the Pont des Arts, where the river carried the city like a lullaby. Leaning on the rail, he read the note one last time. Father, I forgot to choose warmth. I will try again. Your son. He let the paper go. The Seine took it gently, as if it recognized a confession. When he returned to the restaurant, he found Marie in the side hallway, composing an email on the staff computer with her bottom lip caught between her teeth. To your father? He asked. She nodded. He can't hold a guitar steady anymore. Last night, it gave him something back. Pierre hesitated, then bowed his head. May I apologize to him as well? You already did, she said, and surprised them both by hugging him first. At the hotel, Ozzy pulled on a black jacket, not to please a rule but to honor a lesson, and stepped into the late morning. He took the long way to the cafe near the river, walking past shop windows arranging their best selves. A busker with a chipped blue guitar was trying to coax a melody out of the cold. It wobbled, brave and imperfect. Ozzy dropped a coin into the open case and crouched to eye level. It's the waver that makes it human, lad. Don't iron it out. The kid blinked at him, then did the double take that every city teaches its children not to do. Are you? Sometimes, Ozzy said, and tapped the guitar's shoulder like a teammate. Keep at it. By the time he reached the cafe, a waitress with a constellation of earrings had set a table outside without being asked. You're the reason my mother danced in our kitchen, she said, half shy. Coffee? Yes, please. And something sweet enough to forgive all my sins. She returned with a little plate of almond crescents that tasted like ransomed mistakes. Across the street, a newspaper kiosk had clipped the Felipe Post into a column with an astonished headline, Prince of Darkness brings light to Michelin night. Ozzy groaned and laughed in the same breath. Fame always found the loudest adjectives. He'd settle for the quiet verb, learned. Noon drew a smaller crowd than night, but the restaurant felt full at lunch as if last evening had stretched and set around the furniture. A couple from Lion asked for the new dish, though it wasn't printed yet. A line cook returned from break and, before tying his apron, touched the threshold with 2 fingers like a ritual of thanks. Small things, true things. Marie slipped into the service like a violin finding its line in the score. She carried with her a printed email, her father's reply. I cried when he signed the CD, but I wept when he forgave the man at the door. What you saw, my girl, is why we ever bothered with music. It teaches us how to come back. She tucked the paper into her pocket like a holy card and poured water into a glass that would catch the day's last flare and throw it across the room at just the right moment. Near 1 o'clock, a man in a work jacket, clean but plain, stepped into the entry and stopped, shoulders tightening under the chandelier's scrutiny. Pierre saw his own younger ghost in the hesitation. He stepped forward, not with the clipped stride of a gatekeeper, but with the welcome of a neighbor. Bienvenue, monsieur, he said. Your table is ready. Do I need a jacket? You need an appetite, Pierre answered, and the man smiled, the room 1 watt brighter. By late afternoon, the viral post had become a tide. A conservatory student uploaded a video of himself playing changes on a cracked upright in a basement practice room with a caption, For my mum, who taught me to hear. A nurse on break posted a photo of scuffed clogs and wrote, I judged a patient once by his tattoos. Last night reminded me to ask his story first. A teacher wrote, My kids think kindness is extra credit. I'm making it the core exam. Ozzy did not repost any of it. He didn't need the echo. He just read and let the words land the way good rain does, quietly, everywhere. His manager called to confirm the evening's rehearsal, to discuss the set list, to ask for opinions about stage lighting. You still opening with War Pigs? Yeah, Ozzy said, but tuck changes near the end. Feels right. You'll lose the encore. I won't, he answered softly. I'll just move it. Night arrived as if returning to its favorite table. The arena pulsed and roared. Bodies became a single river flowing toward a stage already humming with electricity. Backstage, Ozzy warmed his voice with a scale that climbed like a ladder out of the throat and into the dark. He touched the pendant at his chest, a habit that had become a prayer. Before the house lights fell, he stood alone in the black behind the curtain and, unbidden, pictured a small circle of faces under another set of lights. Antoine's steady eyes. Marie's tear-bright smile, Pierre's humbled nod. He pictured a table, a dish named for a night, a door that would open differently now. The crowd swelled to a pitch that could lift a cathedral. When the lights burst and the first riff split the air, he stepped forward into the roar. The room met him like a wave, but beneath it he felt something truer. The hush from last night carried over like a candle cupped against the wind. He gave them everything, the old thunder, the new steadiness. He prowled, he pleaded, he praised. And near the end, just as planned, he paused. "This one," he said, voice gravel and silk, "is for anyone who's ever been told they were too much of something, or not enough." The first piano notes of changes fell like forgiveness. Phones rose like constellations. In one of those tiny screens, a maître d'hôtel watched from the edge of a kitchen service, a hand over his heart. In another, a young waitress pressed her cheek to a CD cover and cried beside a father who tapped rhythm with trembling fingers on the arm of his chair. In another, a chef leaned against a walk-in door with flour on his sleeve, listening as if the song could season a life. Ozzy sang it like a letter he wished someone had sent him when he was 13. When the last chord settled, there was a hush before the ovation, a breath held by thousands, a city poised between past and possibility. Then the room broke open and blessed him with thunder. He took it, bowed to it, and sent it back as thanks. Later, hours later, home in the hotel's small quiet, he stepped onto the balcony. Paris lay below, blinking and dozing, a planet of windows. He thought about all the doors he had tried in his life, how many had closed, how many he had kicked, how many had opened because someone inside had remembered we are not our costumes. He whispered a benediction to no one and everyone. May we be doormen for each other's better selves. Behind him on the desk, his phone lit and dimmed with messages he would answer in the morning. Next to it lay a folded napkin he had pocketed from the restaurant, a silly keepsake that felt like a sacrament. Across the hem he had written, in a hand that would never get a calligrapher hired, "Thank you for seeing." Oh. He closed the balcony door against the cool, and before turning off the light, laid the jacket across the back of the chair. Tomorrow he'd wear it again, not because rules demanded it, but because Grace had asked. Out in the city, inside a dining room that now remembered what it was for, a new line of menus waited for lunch. On each one, just beneath the chef's name, a small italic flourish read, La Ozzy, served without judgment.